So we'll get started. Thank you all so much for being with us today for our Bayou Culture gathering for this September. I'd like to introduce the folks on the management team who bring this program to you. There's myself. My name is Jonathan Forey. I'm the executive director of the South Louisiana Wetlands Discovery Center. We have Maria Zarang, who's a folk life program director at the Division of the Arts. Dr. Rachel Doherty, who's Assistant Director for Programming and Special Projects over at the Center for Louisiana Studies at ULL. She also represents the Louisiana Folklore Society. We have Dr. Gary LaFleur, who is the R.E. Miller Endowed Professor of Honors Studies at the Center for Bayou Studies over at Nichols. And we are very happy and proud to have Ms. Maida Owens, who is our Senior Program Consultant, and Dr. Shauna Walton, who is our Project Coordinator, who also helped to make the wheels go round. This is a slide that we like to share with all of you to sort of explain why include culture in planning. This picture is this picture is actually what's going on right now. Some of those people pictured here are the ones who are currently peeling shrimp. This was from last year's shrimp peeling party that we had. Um, our culture brings us together in different ways. And for example, peeling shrimp is part of one of those things that our people actually enjoy doing because it gives people a chance to reconnect and visit and catch up with each other. And through that cultural connection, those relationships grow stronger. So that way, in times of crises like a hurricane or something to that nature, these people pull together and they have relationships that they can rely on each other to help rebuild their lives should, bad things happen. There are some folks in this picture, I myself during Hurricane Ida was able to help out with trying to get them back on their feet after Ida destroyed some, their properties. So that's why we want culture to be included in planning. We also want to say thank you to our funders. We are funded through the National Endowment for the Arts, the Louisiana Office of Cultural Development through the Division of the Arts, the M.J. Sindler Family Fund for Culture and Media, and the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities. I'd now like to pass this over to Maria so she can talk a little bit about Folklife Month.
My name is Maria Rain. I'm the Louisiana Folk Life Director. We are just a few days away from our annual Folk Life Month. Uh, 2025 marks the 11th year that we're doing this. And the Folk Life Month it's a collaboration between the Louisiana Folk Life Commission, Louisiana Division of the Arts, and of course the Folk Life Program and all the bachelors. So what Folk Life Month does is it just celebrates the significant cultural contributions that traditional artists have made to Louisiana and all the great things that they've done and accomplished and given back to their communities over the years. Every year, the commission picks 5 to 6 artists to celebrate. This year, we're celebrating 5 artists. This is one of the promo posters we have, and then the 5 artists are mentioned at the bottom. Last gathering, I talked about Diane Honore and Monique in the trailer. They're the first 2 artists who we're going to celebrate at the beginning of October. So Monique, her event will be October 4th at the Rural Life Museum in Baton Rouge at LSU. And we're going to celebrate Diane on October 8th at Baylor University in New Orleans. I'll put those in the chat. But right now, I want to talk about the next 3. And so I've prepared a little bio for each of them. And I'm just going to read that. It's just real short. And I'll give you just an overview of all that we've done for traditional arts in Louisiana. All right, so I'll start off with Smithfield Fair. Smithfield Fair was founded by Alexandria's singer guitarist Dudley Bryan Smith in 1973. He was soon joined by his brothers Bob on acoustic bass and Joel on acoustic guitar. The Smith Brothers' first album, A Place in Your Heart, was released in 1977. In 1989, more albums and concert tours. After more albums and concert tours, the group changed its name from Charmer to Smithfield Fair to celebrate its Scottish heritage. Their original songs are a melting pot of folk, swing, pop, blues, gospel, jazz, classical, Celtic, and Cajun roots. And in 2025, so this year, they released their 36th album titled Never Too Late. We're going to celebrate them later in the month in Alexandria. I'll put that in the chat. Okay, so next up we have Geraldine Robertson, and I'm going to read a little bit about her. She is a master artisan and cultural steward, known for exquisite craftsmanship in split oak basket weaving, drawing on generations of traditional techniques passed down through her family. Geraldine transforms locally harvested white oak into functional and artful baskets that honor the legacy of this tradition. A native of Washington, Louisiana, Geraldine began weaving at a young age under the guidance of her father. Over the years, her work has been exhibited in Europe and the United States at regional craft fairs, museums, and heritage festivals, and she's frequently invited to teach workshops and demonstrations that promote basketry. So we are going to be honored to celebrate Geraldine um, at the Ruby Fest. That's coming up in October. Um, and lastly, we have C.J. Chenier. Clayton Joseph C.J. Chenier was born in 1957 in Port Arthur, Texas. He's the son of Zydeco Great Clifton Chenier. Before joining his father's band on his 21st birthday, C.J. was first a funk and jazz musician. While on the road with his father as a young man, Clifton showed C.J. how to run the family business and develop his music career. When Clifton died in 1987, C.J. stepped up to lead his father's Red Hot Louisiana band. C.J. and the band debuted with the album My Baby Don't Wear No Shoes on Cooley Records. And over his career, he's won numerous awards and honors. He's collaborated and played with so many great musicians. I'm just going to name three: Paul Simon, Marshall Ball, and Jimmy Brown. There's so many others. So a lot of great people that make Louisiana's culture something special. We're going to celebrate them this month. I'm going to put that in the chat, and that's it for me.
Thank you so much for that. So for today's agenda, we're going to be hearing from Dr. Marla Nelson. We're also going to then have questions for her. Then we'll ask her, how does she move forward with intention, which is our theme for this year. We'll get a few working group updates. We'll ask our group if there are any announcements. And then we ask that you stick around for the informal discussion that will happen until 1:30. So, I'm very excited to introduce today's guest. Dr. Marla Nelson is a professor of planning and urban studies at UNO, and she's here to talk to us today about climate, culture, and migration, insights from research on relocation and receiving communities. Thank you so much for being with us today, Dr. Nelson.
Again, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. As Jonathan said, I'm a professor at the University of New Orleans with a background in planning. I'm from New Jersey, moved down to New Orleans a little bit over 20 years ago, and have always been really interested in how we expand opportunities for folks, particularly low and moderate income individuals. I did a lot of research after Katrina, looking at the unevenness of recovery in New Orleans, and was really struck about the inability for planners and policymakers to expand opportunities for people coming back and rebuilding to the city. And then this evolved into a broader interest of similar challenges that people were facing all throughout Louisiana. So what I want to touch upon today, I'm going to keep my comments really brief so that we can have a discussion and questions. But to touch upon three research projects that I've worked on over the past 7 to 8 years with a number of colleagues that have focused on this intersection of climate change, migration, and culture. So the first project I undertook with a number of colleagues, including Tracy Birch, who I expect maybe many of the people on this call know. We received a grant from, as part of the Restore Act, Center for Excellence for Louisiana. This was a funding that came out of the BP oil spill. And we were among the first social scientists to get a grant to do some research. And the projects were supposed to support the implementation of the Coastal Master Plan here in Louisiana. And the 2017 plan had just come out, and it was calling for buyouts and relocations of some 2,400 structures. And at this point, our modeling had gotten really good to be able to identify homes and structures that were really vulnerable. But there was really little information about what people needed and what people wanted, how people made adaptation decisions. So we undertook a project where we examined directly residents' priorities and concerns and try to unpack how people make decisions to stay and adapt in place or move, and with the goal of how to inform more equitable and just relocation and adaptation strategies. So what we did had really wonderful support of the community. We interviewed almost 60 residents of coastal communities in Terrebonne Parish, or people who had relocated from those communities. And we interviewed almost 30 local officials or community activists about, what was needed and, again, what people's priorities were as, communities were being increasingly impacted by weather events. I know that there are some people on the call today who spoke with us, so thank you so much for that. But to touch upon a little bit of our findings, and for those of you from Louisiana on the call, none of this will be new. There was a lot of attention to population loss in a lot of coastal communities, but what we found, moving and migration was very much a way of life, certainly not a new phenomenon. And that image on the left was tracing someone's family history over generations and about how people had moved further inland. And even though the Coastal Master Plan was showing these really dire projections for land loss and speculating that communities would have to be relocated, the idea was when we were on the ground talking to people, is that environmental concerns were just one of many reasons that people move, and oftentimes not the top priority. The image on the right is a person that we spoke with, very committed to living in the community he did. He had moved away for a job, right? So in thinking about how people adapt, whether they stay in place, whether they decide to move, we needed to understand the complexity of migration and also the complexity of the adaptation process. People don't, it isn't just a single decision. People make it a particular moment of time, but it's ongoing and iterative. People had made multiple adaptation decisions, sometimes elevating multiple times before they moved. And then people often moving multiple times. So from our work, really stressing the idea to understand adaptation as this continuum of responses over time. And we made a number of recommendations. I'll just touch upon a few of them here. But first and foremost, the need for more flexible policy if we're really going to help people and communities transform. A lot of the policies and programs for buyouts or other types of adaptations are really misaligned with what people need and with the timing. And we found that there were incredible barriers to low and moderate income households if they wanted to participate. So policy needs to be flexible, meeting people where they are, and providing sufficient resources. Oftentimes, people buyout funding won't provide for comparable replacement housing in safer locations. So if we're really committed to climate adaptation, needing to provide adequate resources, and for those resources to be ready when and if people are ready to move. And then finally, the last recommendation we had here was the need for communities to define adaptation priorities and pathways. It certainly was not and is not um, there's this tendency, let me back up, to portray communities as vulnerable or damaged and needing to recognize that people who live in places that are often threatened by climate are experts on their community and the need to really bring that traditional knowledge into the process. And importantly, when we think about climate adaptation, the goal isn't to move people out of harm's way, but how can we facilitate plans and programs that are going to put people and communities into better places. I saw Craig Colton is here today. Craig and a lot of other people were part of a great NAS study that looked at community-defined relocation. And, certainly many of the findings that we had and the recommendations that we had, are now, I think, recognized like in that work that Craig was involved with. So a second project that I want to talk about was a project on receiving communities that was undertaken by the Urban Institute. The Urban Institute is a nonprofit think tank out of Washington, D.C., and they got a National Academy's grant to study receiving communities along the Gulf Coast. At the time that they got the grant, a lot of press about the need to plan for climate relocation. So Urban said, hey, let's look at places that have received folks that are moving because of climate. So they chose 3 areas. They looked at Houston, Texas, for people who had moved after Hurricane Katrina. They looked at the greater Orlando area for people who had received folks from Puerto Rico as a result of Hurricane Maria. And then they wanted to do a study in Louisiana. And they came to me and 2 of my colleagues at UNO, Pam Jenkins and Monica Farris. And so they included for the 3rd case study looking at migration up in Terrebonne and Lafourche parishes. This wasn't a project that talked to residents, but instead spoke to institutional leaders and looked at receiving communities and their capacity to provide services for newcomers along these 5 different dimensions. They looked at housing, financial institutions, jobs and economic development, healthcare, and social, recreational, and cultural institutions. There are a number of free publications that are available on the Urban Institute website if anyone wants to read some of the final reports. And I just want to highlight a couple of findings that we found in doing the work in Terrebonne and Lafourche. First off, in Louisiana, but also in Florida and in Texas, many of the places that were receiving newcomers didn't identify as receiving communities, right? This was in part, I think, because some communities may be receiving new people, but they're also sending communities. So thinking about in our study area, a place like Homa, people moving up into Homa, but then also people leaving Homa and moving further afield. what we found in our work in Terrebonne and Lafourche is that many people who had moved up were facing financial hardships in doing so. And this is because they, had to deal with expensive insurance, really high housing prices. As I mentioned a moment ago, that there's always difficulty in finding affordable, comparable housing, or something that many folks who move face, and that there were these financial hardships that resulted from moving away from their coastal communities and being disconnected from the social networks and informal economic networks. So Jonathan was just talking about 400 pounds of shrimp, making me a little bit hungry before I had to talk. But I can't think about, how many people who informally can rely on work or food, living in their coastal communities. Similarly, when we think about the social disconnection, people relying on friends and family, or perhaps living with their friends and family. So when individuals would move, there was often some financial hardship related to that. But on the plus side, what we saw in Louisiana and not so in Texas and in Florida was because there was a relatively small distance that people moved. It provided a lot of cultural continuity for folks, because that they were able to stay connected with many of the same cultural and community organizations as they did in their receiving community. And both in this project and the one that I spoke about a moment ago, it was about the importance of these community organizations, but also sometimes community events. So I think about the Rougarou Fest. That was something that, came up about people saying, hey, this was a way to connect. And also, tribal powwows. And I think it really speaks to, in terms of recommendations, the importance of supporting institutions and organizations that really provide networks for people who may choose or need to relocate. Then I want to briefly touch upon a current project that I'm working on. In seeing the chat, I see that one of our graduate assistants has joined us. We have Isaiah Allen from Texas Southern University. Isaiah, I'm glad that you're here today. Tracy Birch and I and a few of my other colleagues in doing this work over the past few years were really struck that in a lot of the planning documents that there's a lot of talk about culture, how important it is to recognize culture, how we need to protect it. But we were always struck that a lot of the discussion of culture it isn't explicit about what are we talking about, what do we mean by culture, and really no substance about how we protect and the interventions that we can take to help for cultural adaptation. And in fact, we found with a lot of Louisiana plans that culture is often lumped in with tourism and economic development, right? That, we need to preserve things for tourists or for visitors. So this was the impetus to this third and current project that I'll talk very briefly about. And this is funded by the USGS Climate Adaptation Center. And I'm working on this again with Tracy Birch from LSU, but with colleagues in Texas at both TSU and Texas A&M, and colleagues at the University of New Mexico. And the idea with this project is to identify adaptation approaches that are supporting culture, how we can preserve it and how it can adapt in the face of communities that are changing because of climate or environmental issues. So this work is very preliminary, and I will say that our funding has been cut. And though we're committed with doing the work, And what this work entails is identifying the action of individuals in each of these three sites that are doing the work and looking at what these innovations are to help preserve and adapt culture and identify from folks that are doing the work what the priorities are and to identify what some of those research and funding gaps are so that we can think about ways in which these efforts can be supported. Here again, I know I've spoken with a handful of you that you've been a part of this project, and I thank you for it. But I think in doing this work, um, the collaborative here is really a model of some of these innovations that we see in adaptation. And I'll just close it off and raise this as a question for the audience that we can talk about in a moment. I mentioned that, in the plans, we were really struck about, culture is talked about a lot, but that there isn't any substance behind it. But I will say that in our preliminary findings from this project, that no doubt we feel that there's a much more robust conversation about culture and cultural preservation and the need for cultural adaptation in Louisiana than we're seeing thus far in New Mexico and Eastern Texas. So I would love your perspectives on that. But I do think, it bodes well and, shows that we've got a tremendous way to go in this front. But, as I said, much more robust conversation going on here than in the other places we're working. And that is all I have. Definitely feel free to reach out to me at my email. I'm happy to talk with you all today, but also, offline if you want to reach out to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation. If any of you have any questions or comments for Dr. Nelson, feel free to raise your hand virtually to jump in. One of the things that I'd like to ask, starting off, in one of the slides, you had that communities need to define adaptation priorities and pathways. So they need to do this for themselves because nobody knows their community better than themselves. And when I read that, I thought about the community that I'm originally from is Chauvin. And in thinking of how do you go about getting a community to define adaptation priorities and pathways? Because, if I am in a minute going to go peel shrimp for the festival with other folks sitting around that table, I can have a conversation with them. But I don't think that people at the birthday party for their 5-year-old is getting together with their family and saying, like, how do we define the adaptation priority? So my question is, how do we get that definition? How do we get the communities to talk about this, to give that definition, to then take the next step after that? Does that make sense? Because it
Yeah.
feels like you need a catalyst to do that, because I don't think people are going to do it individually, although maybe they are.
hmm and that's a great question. And if I can, before answering, back up a little bit, and when I say put in there about how communities need to define it, I find it so striking that in 2025, after all we've been through, someone who's a urban planner, and we can see, all the terrible things that were done in the name of progress, right? That we still have oftentimes very well-meaning planners and local officials and policy folks who say this is what we need, right? Managed retreat. Look at what we can see with these
Yeah,
modeling projections. People have to get out. And this idea of, again, many well-meaning people who come in and say, Jonathan, this is what you need to do, right? And
right,
instead
right.
of saying, hey, where are people at?
Yeah.
And, I agree with you. I mean, that idea of how we start those conversations, I think part of it is on the part of the planners and the policymakers and the experts, right? Showing a tremendous amount of humility of, okay, there's a lot we know, and there's a lot that we can bring to help people through this process. But needing to really have it be driven by what the community wants and what those priorities are. So certainly our role is about educating and listening.
Yeah.
And um, it also means, and this is the more difficult part perhaps, about having long-term commitments in these communities, not just coming in for,
Sure.
okay, I need this information, or here's a policy or program that we have. I'm interested in your thoughts on it, but I think LA Safe,
Yeah. Yeah.
did it,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
got people talking about things. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, right, that
Yeah.
was a pretty comprehensive process, and
Yeah.
really wishing that we had mechanisms to continue on with those conversations.
100%. 100%. And I think, I mean, that pretty much answers that question. How do we do this? LA Safe did do that. And so using that model and implementing that into the future would be great, but we just haven't seen that happen again since LA Safe happened. I haven't seen that model used in our community again. Maybe I missed it, but I agree with you. Yeah. Thank
But
you.
I think, and just to add to that, I mean, in our conversations, and again, it was so surprising how wonderful and open people were with us. But it took time, right? And of course, this woman coming in from New Orleans, and how many people would say, "Oh, we're never leaving," and why, this community is so important. But the, longer you stayed with people and the conversation unfolded,
Yeah.
people had a plan B and a
Yeah.
plan
Yeah.
C, right? And
Yeah.
it was a matter of saying, well, what do you need, right? What are the things that, are you most concerned about? And I think having those conversations is maybe, and you're on the ground, you know this better than I do, but I think people may be further along in some of their thinking
Yeah.
than we realize. So.
Yeah. I agree with that. I agree with that. Dr. Colton.
Hey, everybody. I see some friends out there, Tim and Amy and Jessica and Jonathan and all, and Maida. Thanks for having me in, and thanks for continuing this. I'm up here in Western North Carolina now, and we're celebrating the anniversary of Helene, the 1-year anniversary tomorrow. But I want to go back to the work I did with the what was initially called the Managed Retreat Committee with the National Academy. It didn't take long for that committee, the whole committee, it was a huge committee, it didn't take them long to divorce themselves from that terminology. Everybody at public meetings said, we're not retreating, retreat is giving up. And none of these people were interested in giving up. And then they said, who's managing it? So there was a real pushback to that. But stepping into another part of the lexicon for this whole discussion of movement and relocation in coastal areas, Marla mentioned that some of these so-called receiving communities don't see themselves as receiving communities. Do we need to maybe adjust the terminology in that part of this discussion from receiving to destination, put the people who are making the move in the foreground? Certainly, we have to be cognizant of the concerns of people in a destination community, and to label things sending communities, I think is really also a bit off-putting to people who their community is not necessarily pushing them away. Other circumstances are. It's not the community that's sending. Environmental concerns, economic concerns, all those other many things. So might we try to adopt and shift from, granted, a widely accepted term of receiving community to something more like destination and departure communities? Marla, any thoughts on that?
I think that's a great point. And, I think those are perfect examples about how, academic jargon, migrates into, policy and then discussions with real people. And certainly, I think in terms of this idea of communities not realizing their role in, being these destinations or being these receiving communities, I think, I think maybe the issue goes well beyond language, and it's about really having an idea of being able to understand who is coming to your community and what their needs are. And I think even though Haley relied on the phrase receiving communities, I think Haley Blakeman's work is just so interesting here to actually be talking with local leaders and saying, hey, this is what we see with these population shifts, and there's an opportunity, for your community to potentially be a destination, and what would you need to do to build your capacity to do that. But I agree, the language could and should matter. Maybe if Urban were doing their study now and not being in 2019 or 2020, it would change. But yeah.
Tim?
Yeah, thank you. Marla, I really enjoyed your talk. I'm Tim Slack. I'm a sociology professor at LSU. I was curious in your discussions with people how much the property insurance crisis came up. Because it seems to me that, when you think about culture and the way culture is connected to place, but when you think about how, the degree to which people can actually make the math work in places, we're facing some real difficulties, right? If older folks have to make decisions about what, on fixed incomes, whether or not they insure their property, and younger folks can't get a mortgage because they can't afford the insurance. I'm just curious, that seems like it, from a migration standpoint, could be a pretty big push factor. And I'm just wondering if that came up. And then simultaneously, one of the things that I always think is interesting in Louisiana is that sometimes there's discussion of the property insurance crisis, but that property insurance crisis is discussed as somehow apart from and divorced from, climate and environmental issues.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just curious, sort of what you heard, and if people were making the connection between affordability and climate.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And certainly it came up a lot. And I think it's definitely in the 7 or 8 years that I've been working in this space, taken on increasing importance. And I forget the figure offhand, but in Lower Terrebonne, when we were doing the study, the flood insurance rates were really low, right? And this is people who'd been living in these communities for generations, so they own their homes, so they weren't required to have it. And many people that we spoke with, even people who could, at that time potentially afford insurance, thought that it was in their interest to self-insure, right? And it was just, even at that point, not affordable for many people. It became an issue in terms of um, it became a hindrance for some people to actually relocate. So you would think, oh, my insurance is so high, I need to get out. That there were a lot of particularly older people or people on fixed incomes who the idea of moving, you wouldn't be able to find comparable housing, so you would have to take out a mortgage. And if you did, then you would have to have insurance wherever you moved. And, so that became problematic. And then it meant that their properties were difficult to sell. So if moving meant needing to sell their property, it came up quite a bit. That's real concern about the influx of seasonal residents to these communities. And that was in part because people could come and, buy a house outright and not have to get a mortgage, and knowing that, being able to attract young homeowners was really difficult. So insurance came up a lot, but, in these very complicated ways. Also, I talked about how a lot of policies and programs had participation barriers for low and moderate income people. Some of the adaptation programs require that that you have flood insurance, and there may have been people who wanted to elevate but weren't in that program, so that they weren't eligible. So, yes.
Amy.
Hi, thanks for being here, Dr. Nelson. Uh, I have a bunch of different thoughts. I'm going to try to collect them together. I guess my first thought around your discussion that you had in response to Jonathan's question is, as you alluded to, many communities actually have talked a lot about, they know what their plans and desires are, and have met, or either informally or formally. So I think the issue isn't so much people knowing what they want to do or not, as you mentioned, but aligning that with what actually ends up happening in terms of policy. And, I think we don't have to look much farther than the Ile de Jean Charles situation to see a community that for literally decades got funding to do a huge amount of visioning and planning, all the way down to visioning the entire community, planning it out, working with landscapers. And then when it came down to it, that vision was not realized. So I think the issue sometimes is that there have been, especially since Hurricane Katrina, a lot of communities who are having these conversations, but it's very difficult to translate what people want into what actually ends up happening, and align that with the economic plans of the parish, of the town, of the state. Several years ago, when I was doing some work around this with Alessandra Gerolman and others, we talked and we're working with folks in St. Bernard Parish about retreat, and I just had very frank conversations with the parish government then. This was several years ago, about how terrifying it was for them to have a conversation really publicly about retreat and the kind of economic implications for the parish that they saw. So I guess for me, it's not so much that people don't have plans, but that it's very hard to see those plans come into fruition, especially when they may cross over and counter other plans. And I think we also don't have to look farther than like the mid-Barataria sediment diversion to see how all of these different stakeholders, residents, people in industry, it all can fall apart really easily, or come to a really wonderful conclusion, depending on what your opinion of the mid-Barataria diversion is, right? So I guess that's one of my concerns about the conversation, is there are a lot of communities that have been meeting a lot for a long time. And then I think the other piece is, I think the timing is really difficult, because I think you really nailed it on the head when you said folks don't want to leave, but they do know what their plan B and C is. And I think from talking to a lot of the my community partners that I've known over the years from Terrebonne, Lafourche, and Plaquemines, people are planning to stay as long as they possibly can and do have a plan B. And so the idea of whatever preemptively moving means can be difficult, because the idea is, I want to stay until I can't anymore. What that looks like, it's not 100% clear. It's, a lot of people are facing it right now since Hurricane Ida. Hurricane Ida, is shoving this question in people's faces. I saw Jonathan a couple of months ago when I brought a bunch of community members I'm working with from coastal North Carolina. I brought to meet people that I work with in Terrebonne, Lafourche, and Plaquemines, and We talk to people who are starting to get pushback of even getting permits to rebuild their houses outside of the flood protection, the levee protection system in Lafourche. And while that seems very reasonable and understandable on one hand, culturally, historically, personally, socially, it's very painful. So, I think what it means to move, to be willing to move at some point, and what that looks like and when, is a really difficult piece. And like when the experiment is over is a really good question, like hard question for individual people to answer. But some people are getting closer to it. And then just the insurance piece. So Tim, you may or may not know about these two groups that are doing a lot of work here. So Angelika Morris and her colleagues at Housing NOLA have a insurance committee that meets every other week, and have been working with people in the state legislature to pass a lot of trying and failing mostly to pass legislation that's going to make some regulation around things like how much people's premiums can go up every year. They're doing a lot of work with fortified roof and not having much luck getting legislation passed, but there are people doing a lot of that work. And then there's another group that also works together, which is kind of more nationwide, which is the Coalition for Sustainable Flood Insurance. And so the insurance crisis is a big deal. People are really worried about it. I think, as far as I can, people I've talked to, and one of the issues with that, I think, is, well, not only kind of political issues in terms of regulation and the insurance commissioner and at least private flood insurance companies, private homeowners insurance companies, but exactly what I think somebody just said about what you just said about people being concerned not only about selling their houses, period. So I think there's two issues. If you feel like you're being pushed out by many factors, including high insurance levels, high insurance level may be the thing that either A, makes your land completely unsellable, period, or ends up making it only sellable to a very wealthy person who doesn't mind not having insurance. And when I was there with my colleagues from North Carolina, we went down to Cocodrie and we talked to a lot of people just walking down the street who said, oh yeah, that house is now owned by somebody who doesn't have a mortgage, doesn't have insurance, doesn't care, and isn't from here, or is, just happens to have a lot of money. So I just think, I guess from my perspective, I do think the insurance crisis is a big issue. And I think people more and more are trying to do work around it and are looking at this and are actually, Tim, connecting it to climate change and storms and the environment more and more, I think. And just this idea that people may actually have a pretty good idea of what they'd like to do, but there's a disconnect between what agencies or elected officials can make happen. Sorry, that was a lot.
Well, if you don't mind, Dr. Nelson, if you can respond to that as we move forward to the informal part, or if there's anything that you want to make a comment on that right now, that's fine. Or if we can wait a few minutes, is that okay with you?
Sure.
Okay, excellent. And so let's see. One of the questions that we like to ask our presenters is how do you move forward with intention? Because this is our theme for this year. And so we'd like to ask that question to you. How do you move forward with intention?
That's a great question, and thank you for it. I mean, I think if we look at this unique political moment that we're in, and it's something that I struggle with. I teach young, idealistic planning students, but I think, we need to just keep going on not allow ourselves to get distracted and focus on what really matters to us. In terms of this body of work that I presented today that, I've been working on with my colleagues, I think that there's a few things that I'll touch upon, and one, just the importance of centering community voices and ensuring that, what we're proposing is equitable and just. And this seems pretty straightforward, but I think particularly in this environment, it can be scarier, even scarier to, voice that and needing to find the courage to, keep talking about that and making sure that, justice and equity are baked in to those proposals. And then the real focus on and again, I'm coming at this as a planner, right? Someone who believes in, the role of the public sector. And to say we need to support and build the social and institutional capacity. And, in an era when we're just leaning more and more towards the government backing out of things and thinking about, the market taking over, to really say we need to support and help build the social and institutional capacity of those organizations that are out there doing this work. For instance, like the work of the collaborative here. So.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Um, If any of you are interested in joining any of our working groups, this gives you a bit of information on the groups that are active and who convenes them, and when the meetings would happen. If you need any more information about that, please just let us know. We will not have an October gathering. We hope that you'll join us in the Folklife Village at the Rougarou Fest. That's going to be October 17th through 19th this year. We have lots of things that are happening, lots of delicious food that we talked a little bit about earlier, alligator sauce, we call it turtle soup, shrimp in a whole bunch of different ways. And we have live music. So there's carnival rides, there's a parade, there's a fireworks show. One of the things that we are most proud of this year is beefing up our Folklife Village. And we have Dr. Shauna Walton, who is helping us to make that happen. There's going to be a kids area. There's going to be an area that will have nonprofit organizations that focus in on coastal land loss issues. There'll be 2 tents with cultural demonstrations happening. And then there's the main tent where we have a narrative stage or a talk stage where it's sort of like the Oprah Winfrey show, but our guests are tradition bearers. So on Friday, we're gonna have a Pedro demonstration game. So if anybody's interested in playing Pedro or learning how to play Pedro, we invite you to join us. And then we'll have Fado Do with Cajun music and dancing. We'll have someone there instructing how to do the dancing, and we have the Cajun Music Preservation Society who will be with us to provide the music. And then on Saturday and Sunday, the 18th and 19th, that's when we have the full programming with the narrative stage. There's also going to be cooking demonstrations there and a lot of different performances. So I am most excited about this little section of the festival getting the attention that it deserves, and I think it's gonna become sort of the crown jewel of the festival. So we hope that you can make it out and check that out. We also have festivals Acadien et Creole that is coming up, and if Rachel is available to
We, hey,
excellent, if you could talk a little bit about that.
hi everybody. Yes, Festivals Acadien et Creole will be happening October 10th through 12th in Girard Park. This is the 51st year of the festival. Last year was the 50th anniversary. So this year, the theme of the festival, it's in French, it's Et Esther quoi? So that's Cajun French, North American French, which means, and now what? We've been going on for 50 years, so what now? I'm going to put in the chat a couple of links towards the festival symposium. So my research center, the Center for Louisiana Studies, we program one of the stages at festival, the atelier stage. So it's like small unplugged performances where there are conversations with musicians and tradition bearers sometimes. And we're also doing the festival symposium. So that will be on October 10th during the day. at the Hilliard Art Museum, which is the University of Louisiana Lafayette Art Museum, but it's right next to the park. So the park is like right next to the campus, and the park is between the University Art Museum and a big part of the campus. This year, the symposium, in light of the theme, and now what, we're doing a little bit of a retrospective focusing on when language preservation activism entered into popular culture in Louisiana. So in the 70s, you had a lot of language preservation and activism movements across North America, especially in Canada, that influenced Cajuns and Creoles. So we're going to look at when that happened and the birth of festivals where French visibility became widespread. And then we're going to look at the intersection of activism, popular culture, and fine arts, and showcase some of the most compelling movements today for both Louisiana French and Louisiana Creole in the arts. So we hope that y'all will join us. There's going to be a fabulous exhibition that is happening at the Art Museum at the same time. So yeah, if you love language and the arts and Cajun and Creole music, please come.
That's amazing. That sounds wonderful. So for everybody, October, the weekends are packed with wonderful things for you to experience. So make sure that you get out to Lafayette the weekend of October 10th, and then come on down to Homa for the weekend of October 17th. So lots of great things. In lieu of time, I'll ask that if anybody has any announcements, please, if you just hang tight, because we'll wrap things up. And we hope that you guys will stick around for the informal part of the presentation. And we also would invite all of you to stay connected with us and join our Facebook group. This is the Bayou Cultural Collaborative group, where all of you are able to post things that you would like to let other folks know that's going on in your community. For example, this is one of the posts from the Bayou Youth Leadership Project. So it's a great area in social media to find out what's happening that would be relevant to the topics that we talk about. And then also, all of you, please feel free to post interesting things that may be of importance to other folks there too. So we hope that you'll stick around until 1:30. This concludes the formal part of our presentation, and thank you so very much for all of you being here with us today.